Hey, DNA. Kate Wilson here with another episode of All Access DNA. Today we welcome Carissa Carroll, the founder and CEO of Jack's Basket, an organization born from her heart after her son Jack was diagnosed with Down syndrome. We learn how that diagnosis was, or really wasn't, communicated by the care team. Carissa shares the importance of community and how Jack's Basket celebrates every child with Down syndrome. Let's get started. Thank you so much, Carissa, for being on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
I know we're going to talk about your foundation, Jack's Basket, but first I'd like to hear more about Jack. So I was hoping you could tell us some more about your son.
Yes. So Jack is now 13. He was diagnosed at birth with Down syndrome. What I would say in the 13 years of having Jack, I've learned a little bit about Down syndrome. I've learned a lot about Jack, and he is the middle of my three kids. He loves spending time with his friends. He enjoys going to school to see his friends, not necessarily always do his work, but we do make that happen. He's got a fun personality. He's very active. He enjoys swimming, golfing. He's obsessed with musicals, especially Broadway musicals. And he can be found reciting his favorite lyrics or just movie scenes. And it really, as our family and friends just love him for who he is, he has the perfect timing of these phrases, and it just makes us all just beam with pride for who he is and how much he's taught us in his 13 years.
What's his favorite musical right now? Does he have one?
Yes. I will say his all-time favorite is probably Newsies. He thinks he's Jack Kelly, and he always be like, "You scared of Brooklyn?" But he has loved High School Musical. He's been to Aladdin, the musical on Broadway. And so honestly, we always are looking for new ones, Shrek the musical, but it's kind of, he gets a favorite. He's kind of obsessed with it for a little bit, and then somebody will introduce him to a new one. So it's always changed.
That's nice to hear some more about him, as well as more about your family. And you mentioned, he's 13. He was diagnosed at birth with Down syndrome. Tell us a bit more about how you learned about his diagnosis.
Yeah. So he's, like I mentioned, in the middle of my three kids. Pregnancy with Jack was very typical to my oldest, and really was feeling great, and everything was going as I had planned. And, while I was in labor, his heart rate actually dropped pretty dramatically. And that was really right before I was going to, we were about to welcome him, and everybody went tense in the room. So I had to be put under for an emergency C-section. And my husband wasn't able to be in that operating room when he was delivered. And so when I was in recovery, a nurse had walked in with Jack to my husband where he was waiting. And he had said, he just thought he was going to be there for the delivery. So it kind of tells you how quickly everything went. But the nurse practitioner, the first words out of her mouth was, "Are you aware of trisomy 21? Chris recalls he must have looked confused because she listed off characteristics that Jack was showing of Down syndrome, and basically left the room. And Chris recalls at that point in his life hadn't had much experience with anyone with Down syndrome, so really questioned a lot of things. How would it, impact his health? Would he even live? How would it change our 2-year-old at the time? And really had that life-changing news, the responsibility of sharing it with me, because no one else really ended up talking to us about his diagnosis. And so I kind of summarize it to say it was really given in an abrupt and insensitive, even assumptive way, in the way the question was posed to him. And we didn't hear congratulations, and we had just given birth to our son. And that was really, in the days ahead, it really ties into how people are given the news, and ultimately, in a sense, how they were treated. Kind of puts this assumption of what life is going to be like. But I can't tell that story without sharing the next day that our nurse, Diane, came in and she looked at him in the bassinet. She knew he had trisomy 21. And she said, look at your precious baby. And I always say when I feared that the world wouldn't accept my son because he's different, and I questioned how strong I was, and now my child has additional needs, and how will he be accepted? A complete stranger reminded us with her words, look at your precious baby. She saw him as our baby first, not as a diagnosis. And that is really a flashbulb moment that we needed to be like, yes, he's our son. He's a brother. He is a classmate, a teammate. He is so much, that diagnosis does not define him. And I really feel like Diane was the angel that we needed to really remind us of the gift of who he is.
I appreciate you sharing it. And I hate that you had to go through it wasn't even necessarily clinical or medical. It was just abrupt and rude, honestly. I think with kind of laying it there. So I'm glad to hear about Diane and her coming in and kind of, like you said, having that breakthrough moment. And you mentioned this on the Jack's Basket website too. There's I think a post you had about my son is a person, not a diagnosis. So what does that continue to mean to you, as you watch him grow, as you work in this advocacy space?
Yes. I mean, we live in a world that we generalize people, and certainly people that are marginalized. When the people that did, as we navigated this journey, the people that said congratulations to us instead of saying I'm sorry, they knew somebody with Down syndrome. And in any experience in our life, when we have a relationship with someone, it changes our perspective, right? And it brings, rather than a group of people that are defined by X, Y, and Z, is like, hey, get to know somebody. Because we're all uniquely created. Every time I'd see a 2-year-old boy, didn't mean that child is going to be just like my other son, but in a sense, in our society, we put these labels on people and then it defines who they are or ourselves. And that is the thing that Jack has really opened our eyes to, a new perspective to see each person as a unique individual that was created with the purpose to do incredible things. That's not dependent on the number of chromosomes, not dependent on a diagnosis or a label. But ultimately, I wish we lived in a world that leaned in and asked people more to define themselves. The other thing Jack has truly taught us is, my husband and I are both very goal-oriented, like strivers, determined, that we live in a society that really emphasizes accomplishments or achievements. And Jack has allowed us to see, rather than celebrating people for what they do, how about celebrating people for just who they are, for being human, and reminding us that we are all created for community and we all need each other and our needs are different. And reminded us we're called to a life of service to others. But we live in this world that says, what can you do for me? And raising a child with Down syndrome or a child with a disability, like that is living a life of service to others. And it really helps us take our eyes off ourselves and our circumstances. And I think we find a lot of meaning and purpose by serving other people.
And it's interesting you mentioned some of the things that you've learned in terms of seeing somebody for who they are, not necessarily what they do. And I also like the piece that you included about kind of thinking about service. It sort of seems like it's given you a better sense in terms of like we're part of a whole or something bigger.
Mm-hmm.
What have you learned specifically about like parenting from Jack? And then also, as he gets older, well, all three of your children get older, how does parenting change for you?
Yeah. Well, I think parenting is such a humbling journey, right? I'm an educator. My husband is also, and I always say I was a better parent before I had kids, right? Like we all have this idea of what we envision, and then you get thrown into it and there's so much that's unexpected. And I think that's having a posture of always learning. And if it's in parenting journey, if it's in our friendships, our relationships, personal, professional, oftentimes we are expected to have an answer and we don't always have that. And that's not a good feeling, right? But ultimately, what do we notice in others and what does the situation need? Those are two very big questions that can help you understand someone better. So with having two kids with one less chromosome than Jack, each of my kids are on their own timeline. What Jack has taught us to do is not take things for granted and to celebrate everyone for, as I said numerous times, for their uniqueness. But what may be challenging for one person might not be for the other, but they're still very valuable.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the thing that I think I've learned as a parent is there's a lot of things that are out of my control, and it's my perspective to how I approach it. Asking for help, seeking mentors, community and resources. That's where it ties to our response to Jack's diagnosis, that it was really in my nature to say, all right, we're going to give him the best life possible. And I read all the books on Down syndrome. The best resource was connecting with other parents that had been on this journey and knew about what it was like to raise a child with Down syndrome. And we are made for community, because when you have somebody that comes alongside of you that can say, hey, I've been there, I understand your feelings, and they're okay. And just to feel less alone when it's so uncertain, or sometimes your thoughts are so powerful, to have somebody to listen to you. And then also maybe encourage you in that season or wherever you're at in that is powerful. And I saw that many times throughout my own life, even before having Jack. And my heart broke for these families that they didn't get connected to the communities, because it was natural for my husband and I to be like, all right, I'm sure there are, things out there that families have created. Yet what was happening with the new families, and these doctors and healthcare clinicians were trained to say these things, I just felt like there was such a disconnect. But the loving and supportive community of parents raising a child with Down syndrome, individuals with Down syndrome, there was no connection. And that's what really led me to say this needs to change.
Mm-hmm. And I wonder too, like you talked about kind of how you and your husband were told. And then, the next day when Diane comes in and talks about your precious baby, says congratulations, I imagine that would have been fairly isolating those first 24 hours, because you're like, it's not kind of the same experience we had, right, with our firstborn.
Uh-huh.
And that, I think, again, shows the power of connection, even if it's somebody that doesn't necessarily know exactly what it's like to be a parent of a child with Down syndrome, that recognition of a miracle still happened. You still have a baby,
Yes.
and recognizing kind of the impact of that moment without getting sidetracked by what something says he might be or how he looks. It's kind of just, again, acknowledging him for who he is in that moment.
Yes. And, to reflect, no one came in and gave assumptions about what my other son, Luke's life looked like. So when I kept hearing these diagnosis experiences with these families, I just kept being like, but how come we do that with babies with Down syndrome? How come we rattle off all the potential things that could happen, yet no one said, hey, there's a 50% chance Luke will get divorced or die by suicide or this or that, potentially. I mean, when you turn on the news today, there's a lot of things happening. And oftentimes it's not an individual with Down syndrome causing these violent or these things happening. And nobody came into our room when we had our child with the typical 46 chromosome. So there is this reality to which healthcare clinicians, in a sense, felt like it was their responsibility to give this long laundry list of potential outcomes. Yet how much of that, the timing, and what was based off of a personal bias or what was their medical training? And those questions all kept coming up as an educator, that through my profession of teaching, we got all these teaching strategies to engage your audience and work on communication skills. Yet most of my friends in healthcare were said, we really didn't get much training on this besides the breaking bad news paradigm of, I'm sorry, pause, I have bad news. Well, you can apply that to a car accident where someone, is deceased. Like, why are we attaching that to what our community would say is really subjective and puts a value and a bias on individuals with Down syndrome. So through the course of that first year of Jack's life of falling in love with who he is, and I can't say that I didn't have denial and fear and really just was hoping they were wrong because I was so scared of how it would change us. And we oftentimes want the easy, comfortable life. And there's just such a narrative around it. And when I, grew in learning from Jack and in the ways he's taught us all of these things is anything that has been challenging or difficult in our lives related to his diagnosis or parenting or grief and loss with other family members, what you can look back is say, it's through those moments that I grew the most. I didn't realize how strong I was, or that these people came into my life because of this. I would have never met a physical therapist, OT, and speech therapist that have really become a part of the community that helps Jack reach his best potential.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So, through the course of all of this and getting to the point of creating a Jack's Basket, it just felt like making sure that families understand there's a whole range of emotions and responses to unexpected news, for sure. But the difference is when it is presented as if this, is to be avoided and bad and really puts a narrative and a discrimination to individuals with Down syndrome. That's the part that we need to be talking about and making sure that people are aware of the hope and the support in the community.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a good transition into talking about, so you mentioned, the power of community. Really, when you felt like you were getting the most help or assistance was reaching out to other parents, but also you have a background in education, and you went through your experience of getting the diagnosis. So kind of pulling all that together, what was the aha moment or the thing that said, all right, I want to create something like Jack's Basket. I want to do something in the community or to help other parents who may be facing something similar?
Yes. So we were approaching Jack's first birthday, and through a college friend, her husband's college roommate, it was just like, hey, somebody just received this news for their daughter. And actually, she's 7 months old. And Jack was at that time 11 months old. And would you meet with her? Because she's really been grieving and she's really not in a good place. And I invited her over to our home and I said, hey, tell me how you were told your diagnosis. And she said, she's our oldest. And seconds after she was born, a nurse in the room yelled out that this baby has Down syndrome, get her to the NICU. And she's like, I hadn't seen her. I hadn't held her. And so she was like, that was a whirlwind, first time parent, kind of really explained it as a traumatic experience. And then the pediatrician came in and really also abruptly came in and said, well, we suspect your baby has Down syndrome. These are all the things she won't be able to do, and a long laundry list of things. And I just kept thinking, yeah, our experience was abrupt and insensitive, but nobody gave us a list of things that Jack wouldn't be able to do. So it kind of really made me furious of being like, why did they think she couldn't do these things? But I kept listening and I said, have you connected with any other parents? And she said no. And it had been 7 months. And that's a really long time, right? And I said, I'm just so glad that she vulnerably showed up at a complete stranger's house and shared about her experience. Yet she was in still such grief, and that I sensed that she wasn't able to accept her new life with her daughter. And so much of it tied back to how she was told. And so I was really on a mission to really talk to any healthcare provider that would be caring for a family, either prenatally or at birth, and said, tell me more about what you were trained in. So went back on Jack's first birthday because there was the basket program side of the community resources that are free and available to families that I wanted to make sure, because Families come from all different backgrounds, different languages spoken, different family dynamics, all of these things, different additional diagnoses. Why is it on the family to have to go seek these things out? Because I did receive an outdated binder that basically said all the delays that Jack would have, and then I had to join this association. That's not what I needed. I just needed somebody to listen and say that we were going to be okay, which we had people in our lives, but I kept thinking about these parents that didn't have that ability or energy, or just they were dealing with so much. And then I had these providers that were trained to say this, but then they didn't know where to send them because there's all these different organizations. So you get into schooling or this or that. And I was like, no, the timing of the diagnosis to a 1-year birthday. Why is there such a gap? Let's focus on this. So we went back in 2014 with the first few baskets, really to just put baby gifts in there and put a letter and then the free resources and baby gifts. And a family found out or received one of those first baskets and said it brought them hope for their son's life. They said in the weeks that they were in the hospital working on feeding, not one person said congratulations. So it really broke my heart. And it was like this bittersweet. We got to honor, Jack's 1-year birthday by going back to celebrate a new family, and that brought them hope. Yet this continues to happen. And again, trisomy 21 is not a new diagnosis in 2014, right? And so that kind of was just my passion to say this needs to happen everywhere. We need to do this everywhere. And it continued to grow. And then more and more families were reaching out saying, hey, this was our experience. Our child makes us better. How do I get involved? And really has grown to what it is today. We have now welcomed 14,000 babies in 62 countries and 50 states. We get requests for new babies, 8 babies a day right now. And we will celebrate in 2026 3,000 families and their babies. So,
And I love that you choose the word celebrate, because I was listening to a couple different webinars and things about the organization, and that's one of the things that kind of came through was the baskets are celebratory. Like it's again, offering some additional support, but I think that's one of the things is congratulations, welcome to your new baby. How are some of the ways that Jack's Basket does this? Like how are they celebratory?
Yes. So along with the items in the basket that are for welcoming a new life, newborn gifts, anywhere from gifts for the baby to gifts for mom and now dad and siblings. There is a children's book in there that explains Down syndrome to cousins, siblings, that just says we celebrate, our family member with Down syndrome. So it's really bringing back that message that this is your baby first, right? The same thing that Diane had to encourage us and remind us of. But every basket request is offered a parent connection, which is one of our volunteers. We call them basket delivery parents. And they offer to bring those baskets in person to the family. They do a coordinated visit of either at the home or the hospital or at a agreed place where it's just a person that can just say, how are you doing with this new news? And to be, again, that resource a little farther ahead to understand not everybody's ready to celebrate. And it is life-changing news and it's shocking and unexpected. It's good. And that's the part where potentially that volunteer is ready to celebrate even before the parents are ready to celebrate. But the underlying mission is this life is worthy of celebration, and that is woven into every part of our organization.
And I guess who can request the baskets? How can they request the baskets?
Yes, we have healthcare providers requesting baskets every day for their patients. We have family and friends, the parents themselves can request the basket, but really we want to, the biggest issue is not enough people know about us. So if you know of a family that recently received this news prenatally or at birth, we want you to tell them about the resource of Jack's Basket so that no family leaves an appointment or the hospital without connection to the community and has hope. So right on our website, you can request a basket for the family. And we just ask that you've mentioned the resource to them and get permission to get us connected to them. And obviously we respect HIPAA and don't share any of their information. And we really see ourselves as an extension of care to healthcare clinicians that are caring for our families.
One of the things that I love about Jack's Basket is that you have it does kind of it is a gap, right, between the healthcare provider, the patient, and there was kind of like this, I don't even know how to describe it, but this thing that was falling through, in terms of being able, one, to just kind of break the news, talk to them about it, but then also to have the healthcare provider actually give resources and work with the patient rather than the patient having to just do it all on their own.
Yes.
The other thing is the website also has education and resources, not just for patients, but also for these providers. One thing I'm curious to know more about is how do you think medical providers can discuss a Down syndrome diagnosis in a way that's both supportive and empathetic?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think so much I've realized in healthcare is sometimes it comes down to process, right? Like oftentimes prenatally, these screening tests are very easily available and how they're presented to the families. We've heard anything from like, we're just looking for bad things like Down syndrome. Well, if that's how we're explaining a screening test to, I connect and listen to healthcare clinicians all the time of being like, patient-led care of saying, hey, these things are a part of prenatal care if you would like to know. Oftentimes our families are trying to find out the sex of the baby, right? And want to do a gender reveal party and they're getting this information out there. So I'll just say that the encouragement to those that are caring for families that would receive this news is going back and saying, what is our process for communicating unexpected news? And when is the last time we looked at communication as a modifiable skill? And asking our patients if the results should come back positive for a genetic condition, how would you like to receive that news? Would you like it in your patient portal? Would you like a phone call? Would you like an in-person appointment? So those are things that I think, as we know that what we say is, technology is outpacing compassion and it's impacting our community in a big way. And when I think of my friend Anna, who received the prenatal diagnosis, she wanted to find out prenatally. So she was in the best place to deliver her child if her child should need additional support. So that's where some people can look at it in a different way of, oh, you're just trying to screen out. But when we hear our data, 50% of our families would express that their diagnosis experience was negative because it was only given, hey, your positive results for trisomy 21, you need to come in and terminate this pregnancy. Like that is stuff that we heard as that was the only option or information given. And that in a sense is not even asking your patients after you deliver that news, how are you feeling or what questions do you have? Just simply pausing versus going into a specific option, not really understanding or listening to what your patients are feeling or thinking in that moment, right?
Right.
So that's where I feel I'm hopeful communication at the forefront is being addressed in like not even just trisomy 21, fill in the blank, right? Like I think my friend who received her breast cancer diagnosis, she was like, received it. It was like, we've got hope. We can do this. You're going to fight it. Great. And it's like, why are we not doing that for what our community and data shows? 99% of parents of children with Down syndrome would not change their child. They truly love their son or daughter with Down syndrome. Now, some people could say, what about the 1%? We know there were parents that not necessarily great parents long before a diagnosis came, So you're like, we're again making a lot of assumptions. And also I want to recognize in healthcare, we are very a high achieving, very intellectual, extremely just like accomplished audience of people. And you are communicating a diagnosis that has an intellectual disability, cognitive delay. Like, we, in our own lived experiences, potentially might have a bias, which let's just address it and recognize how that can be perceived by other people. That's like saying to a professional athlete that maybe delivers a child that has a physical impairment, like it's real. We are human. We have natural responses. It's when we are in a place of communicating powerful, life-changing news, where does our implicit and explicit bias play into that conversation? And so we're just really trying to bring that to light and it can be applied in many situations. That's why we created a medical curriculum called Communicating Unexpected News and do webinars where we cover the CEUs and the CMEs so that you have practice to, it's not a matter of if you'll be communicating unexpected news, it's a matter of when, and putting more tools in your toolkit. But if we don't ask our patients questions, we could be like, I think of our one of our staff members, Lauren. She has a sister with Down syndrome. And so when she gave birth to her son, Hayden, it was like, what are you all sad about? My sister has Down syndrome. I know of this life. There was this assumption that she was going to be just heartbroken and sad. And she's like, I love my sister. Yes, it's unique. And she is the best gift. And my son has Down syndrome now. We will figure this out, but you don't need to be sad for me. Right. So that's a really a position that we want to make sure that providers are more equipped for these conversations and don't shy away from them.
And I think it's interesting what you say about the assumption. Some of it is an assumption because you have like this bias, whether implicit or explicit. And part of it too is that if you're making the assumption and thinking about, like, as a medical professional, I'm going to regurgitate all this info at you, you're not really making your patient and that family the center of the conversation. And that's who it should be, because that's the person going through it at the time.
Yes. And it's this balance between, in your position is to provide the best care, and you've got all this knowledge potentially about a diagnosis, yet they can only retain a short amount. And when in the timeline is it appropriate to get to that? And that's why we created the 7 strategies for communicating unexpected news, so that you can it might be a follow-up phone call or a follow-up visit to really just say, what is needed in this moment when I'm delivering this news? And when might it be best for then I do a, short-term next steps? But it almost becomes like that. I see the visual of Charlie Brown's teacher where she's like, wah, 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 right? Because what happened before the diagnosis and what happened after, oftentimes it comes down to not what you said, but how you made them feel.
Right. Right.
And I have yet to meet a provider that felt great about doing a terrible job delivering news and also having no resources for them.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm so sorry. Here's bad news. Good luck. And that's it, and it's like, that's not what people dedicated their lives for, caring for people. And I will just say, we are building champions for our babies. And I would hope every healthcare clinician that took their oath to provide the best care for their patients would include my son. Right. And that's the part where you're like, when we use language that's powerful, that puts a value on these babies and individuals, that really impacts others. It impacts the future. It impacts communities. And we want everyone to be a champion for individuals with Down syndrome, because they make our world better, and that we will continue to share that. And I think of my friend Kirsta, who has Down syndrome. And I think of, she's in our community called a self-advocate. Like, think of that. She is, in a sense, has to live her life as if she's trying to convince people she has value. But doesn't she have value just for being her? So
Right.
It really gives us a chance to kind of pause and think, and no judgment on how people respond to this news. Again, it's different than, what people envision. But when you can connect to hope and community and celebration, that is the work of Jack's Basket. And we are just very focused and passionate on ensuring that the narrative around Down syndrome changes.
And you've talked some about some of the things that are already available through Jack's Basket. Are there things that you can share with us about kind of the future, or what are some things currently that we can look forward to with Jack's Basket?
Yes. Well, I mean, going back to, we still have a gap of babies that, are diagnosed and the families don't get the hope and the resources. So, ways to help is spreading our mission. Tell someone that, about this resource. We have provider packs, things like that. If it's Down syndrome or another condition, hope and community is life changing, right? And, what does the future look like? I would just say, people have asked, would Jack's Basket continue to do this for other conditions? I think I would love to be able to bring more hope and celebration and community to many different groups. So we'll see if that happens. No plans as of yet, more so to just continue to learn through this experience. But we continue to grow our diagnosis advocacy work with healthcare clinicians. I encourage every listener to go onto our website and look at those resources. They're all free and available. Really ask that you request a basket for a new family. We have local volunteers all over the US delivering baskets. So wherever you're at and listening, there's a lot of volunteer opportunities. And so future plans, there's always a lot of opportunities, and the more that people can give of their time to help us reach more families, the better it'll be.
And I noticed that there was something coming up on October 9th, some type of gala.
Yes. So we have our You Make Me Better Gala on Friday, October 9th. It is here in the Twin Cities. So it's held in Minneapolis, and we fill that room and share powerful stories of how our lives are better because of people with Down syndrome. Our goal for that event is $1 million. Our annual budget, and so you can live stream for free and attend. It's a very powerful program. And I know if you choose to put that on your calendar and log in and watch, you really will be moved. We have a maternal fetal medicine physician that will be speaking as a part of the program, a couple individuals with Down syndrome sharing about their lives, and volunteers. It's been 10 years since we became a nonprofit, so we'll be highlighting that. And then, but our annual budget to celebrate 3,000 babies is $2 million for the year, and to be able to do what we would like to do for the families. So we're supported through this gala and through people choosing to fill baskets for new families and pay it forward, and or just opportunities, jogging for Jack, burgers and baskets. You'll find all of those ways to get involved on our website, jacksbasket.org.
Perfect. And we'll also put some information in the show notes as well, so people can look there. Before we wrap up, one thing that I wanted to know is, for parents who are currently where you were 13, 14 years ago, what would you say to them today?
Mm-hmm. Well, one, I would say congratulations. I would also just affirm that the feelings that they're having are completely a part of adjusting to a new path that potentially you didn't plan for. I can confidently tell you your child will make your life better in ways that you didn't know you needed. I am excited. And I'm also, some of the best gifts in life have been the unexpected. And I am just hopeful that they will truly accept their son or daughter for who he or she is. But to give yourself grace, this is new and it's unexpected, and you are not alone. And there is so many people out there that are there to cheer you along and come alongside you at wherever you're at in this new journey.
Thank you so much, Carissa. I really appreciate you spending the time with us today.
It was a pleasure for me. So thank you, Kate.
For more information about this episode, visit allaccessdna.podbean.com, where you can also stream all the episodes of the show. Any inquiries on the podcast can be sent to allaccessdna@gmail.com. Please rate and review the podcast on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen. This helps other people like you discover the show. Note that this podcast is for entertainment and education and is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice. Please consult your physician with any questions you may have regarding your health. All Access DNA is an independent podcast hosted and produced by me, Kate Wilson. Designs by NKJ created the logo. Thanks for listening and join us next time.